Hi there. Thanks for tuning in to the Canadian Constitution Foundation's Freedom Update. Today I want to tell you about the first day of hearings at the Public Order Emergency Commission, also known as the Rouleau Commission. The first day was October 13th, and the commission is examining and assessing the basis for the Trudeau government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act in response to the 2022 Freedom Convoy. If you were not able to watch the hearings, in this video, I'm going to give you a quick summary about what went down. So I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine and I'm the Litigation Director at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a Canadian legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms. I upload regular videos about our ongoing cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. Also, please remember that my videos are not legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So the long-anticipated public inquiry into the federal government's first ever invocation of the Emergencies Act in response to the Freedom Convoy protests are finally underway in Ottawa after some delays. The commission is also known as the Rouleau Commission. It's named after Justice Rouleau, who is the commissioner. He's a justice of the Court of Appeal of Ontario. The commission started hearings on Thursday, October 13th in Ottawa, with opening statements from the parties and an introduction of some overview reports from the Commission Council. By law, the Commission's final report examining and assessing the basis for the government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act must be laid before Parliament before February 20th, 2023. This is the deadline set out in the Emergencies Act itself, and it cannot be changed or extended. Getting this done by February 20th is a Herculean task. 22 lawyers, as well as several policy advisors and a research council, have been appointed to help Justice Rouleau. The preliminary list of potential witnesses includes 65 names, including the Prime Minister, a number of cabinet ministers, the Deputy Prime Minister. It includes senior law enforcement and bureaucratic staff, as well as convoy organizers. The commission also has awarded 20 different organizations standing as parties to the inquiry, which means that they can participate in the cross-examination of all of those witnesses. For context, no other public inquiries have had their deadline set by statute. They've also had far more time to do their job. Justice Rouleau pointed out that the Air India inquiry took 4 years to issue a report. The commission on the decline of sockeye salmon took 3 years to issue a report. And the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls took over 3 years to issue a final report. This commission has just 300 days to complete its work. The hearing started at 9:30 on October 13th, and there were sharp disagreements immediately apparent in the opening statements from the parties in the inquiry. Counsel for the federal government underscored its view that Canada faced what they called an unprecedented and critical situation in the face of the ongoing Freedom Convoy protests and blockades, including threats of ideologically motivated violence and an impact on Canada's trade, international relationships, and reputation, according to the federal government. Paul Champ, a lawyer representing the residents of Ottawa, underscored the highly disruptive and what he called traumatizing experience of the protests, with continuous honking through the night and loose jerry cans on the streets, as well as general disorder. On the other hand, the dismay of some of the provinces at the manner and merits of invoking the Emergencies Act was also clear. Counsel for Saskatchewan and Alberta both expressed disapproval for their lack of consultation prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. To quote the counsel for Saskatchewan, who discussed a call from the federal government to the provinces, he said the call was not so much about consulting as it was about telling. Some of the provinces had requested that the Emergencies Act application be geographically limited, which it was not. I mean, obviously this would have made sense since there were not really protests taking place in a number of provinces. Saskatchewan also opposed the financial measures, which required banks and other institutions to take significant steps with little guidance from government. Council for Alberta noted the province was able to deal with the Coutts border blockades under existing ordinary laws and that none of the powers under the Emergencies Act were necessary in Alberta itself. Civil liberties groups, including us at the Canadian Constitution Foundation and other organizations like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, they noted the sweeping rights implications of the use of the Emergencies Act. The invocation of the Act severely restricted the right to freedom of expression, assembly, and association, and the emergency economic measures, those were the bank account freezing orders, they chilled freedom of expression by mandating that banks freeze bank accounts, and this was all done without a warrant. From our perspective at the CCF, the fundamental question is whether the condition in the final clause of Section 3 of the Emergencies Act, and that is a requirement that the Ottawa protests and border blockades could not be effectively dealt with under any other law in Canada, either provincial, federal, or municipal. We've argued that this cause codifies the requirement that the Emergencies Act is a law of last resort, which can only be triggered when all these other legal tools fall apart. And in our view, that condition was clearly not met. Just like in Coutts and Windsor, the Ottawa protests were actually cleared using existing police powers. Evidence from former Ottawa Chief of Police Peter Slowly that was recently disclosed at the Special Joint Committee on the Declaration of Emergency, that evidence from Mr. Slowly confirms that there was a plan to clear protesters, a plan that actually included bringing 1,800 additional officers from across Canada to Ottawa that was in place without the declaration of the Emergencies Act. Now, I've uploaded a video of our opening statement that our lawyer, Sujit Chowdhury, made, so I'll link to that opening statement above, and I'll leave it in the description below so you can watch what we said in our opening statement. In addition to all of these submissions made by the different parties, including us, Council for the Commission introduced a number of what are called overview reports. These reports set out important background information. Commission counsel had prepared these reports, which they say is a non-exhaustive summary of publicly available information. The reports aren't about the merits of the invocation of the Emergencies Act or conclusive, but they are meant to summarize some important facts. The report topics include a chronology of the protests, an overview of key events leading up to the invocation of the Emergencies Act, as well as an overview of how the Emergencies Act works. And it also includes a summary of that Section 58 statutorily required explanation that the federal government give for its invocation of the Emergencies Act. There was also an overview report on the COVID-19 backdrop of the protests, but the Commission's mandate is actually not to examine the federal government's COVID-19 response or the merits of the protest itself. Rather, the Commission is charged with reporting on the circumstances that led to the declaration of the public order emergency, and more importantly, whether the federal government had legal justification to invoke this historic law. The Act really is historic. It's the successor to the discredited War Measures Act, which was abused during the FLQ crisis in Quebec. The Emergencies Act, especially the last resort clause, was drafted to ensure that the Act could never again be abused by a federal government against its political opponents. This report is so important to guide governments in future instances of social disruption, which actually seem to be increasing in Canada and around the world. Now that the glass has been broken on this extraordinary instrument that is the Emergencies Act, the Commission needs to look soberly at the evidence and circumstances that led to its invocation. Now, remember that this inquiry is completely separate from the court challenge that we at the CCF are bringing in federal court. If you want to learn more about the legal court challenge, I will link to some videos about it above, and you can watch those, and I'll also leave them in the description below. The Commission is also still taking submissions from the public. That means that you can send in a letter, a written statement to the inquiry about what you saw, at the protests, what you thought of the protests, what you thought of the government's response, what you saw in the government's response. You can send in a letter outlining all of that. It is extremely important for the inquiry to receive these public comments. And I have a video and a website explaining how to send those letters in. So check that out too. Lastly, I want to say how proud I am of all of the work that we are doing in this inquiry and in the legal challenge in federal court. And we could not do any of this work if it wasn't for our CCF supporters who have given to us so generously. Our legal fees in all of this are really expensive, as you can probably imagine. So if you want to support our work, we would appreciate it so much if you could help us by making a donation to our legal fees. If you can't, honestly, I get it. Just by watching this video, you are helping in a small way. Since the YouTube channel is monetized, we do get a small amount of ad revenue through YouTube. So even just making it this far in the video really helps. So if you want to do a little more, you can share this video, give it a like, and that will help us as well. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.